Hello and welcome to week 6 of CASY summer camp. Today I'm talking about grief rituals and self-connection. My name is Victor and I'm an online coach for neurodivergent and gifted adults. I'm also into making neurodivergent memes and advocacy and educational content. Before I dive into this, I always pack a lot of information into my slides, so please don't feel like you need to understand everything that I've listed. Take what resonates and feel free to set aside what doesn't. I'm trying to cater to a diverse range of experiences and learning styles, and I do err on the side of being too comprehensive sometimes. If you walk away with just one new insight, that's a win in my book. My first encounter with a grief ritual came from the TV show Gilmore Girls. Lorelai describes wallowing as get back in your pajamas, go to bed, eat nothing but gallons of ice cream and tons of pizza, don't take a shower or shave your legs or put on any kind of makeup at all, and just sit in the dark and watch a really sad movie and have a good long cry and just wallow. You need to wallow. I find this to be a really relatable way of grieving because there's this kind of unrestrained acceptance of the depth of emotions involved. Now, there is no right way to experience grief or to process it passively or actively, but there are different options. And grief, after all, is a natural response to loss, and it can manifest in many different ways across the emotional, physical, cognitive, and behavioral aspects. It can involve feelings such as sadness, anger, confusion, or numbness, and also changes in sleep, appetite, concentration, and motivation. If you want to learn more about wallowing in Gilmore Girls, feel free to check out these clips on YouTube. It's actually pretty interesting and I find pretty relatable. In neurotypical culture, grieving is often associated with a specific set of events. That might be things like loss of family, friends, relationships, pets, losing a job, moving abroad, or being a victim of something horrible. But these stereotypes can be quite narrow when in fact I think there can be a lot of varied things that are equally worth grieving for, even though they might not seem as significant practically. And I call this concept neurodivergent grief. It's not an official term, it's just something I've come up with through lived experience and observation and a bit of theory as well. So neurodivergent grief expands on what we might recognize as worthy of grief. It invites acknowledgement and mourning for a wide range of experiences. And these include things like unmet needs, missed milestones or delays in life, opportunities that weren't accessible to us, unrealized potential, the absence of experiences that others take for granted that we observe but don't get to receive ourselves. There might be unfulfilled expectations, unspoken words, or undelivered communications, abandoned dreams and thwarted intentions, personal sacrifices and compromises, and the burden of masking. So, why might we want to use a ritual for grief? Now, I use the term ritual very loosely. It doesn't mean that something is fixed and completely rigid. In fact, we can be very adaptable and flexible with how we design grief rituals for ourselves. And I guess the main point is simply that we're using this term to recognize and hold an intentional space for grieving, and the rest is flexible in how you implement that. Now, some of the benefits of doing a grief ritual as opposed to, let's say, more passive grieving, well, it's highly adaptable. It facilitates emotional and nervous system regulation. It's a good way to deepen self-connection and self-knowledge. It's almost like having an intimate date with yourself. It strengthens your ability or the habit of holding space for yourself and your emotions. It's a really powerful secondary tool for regulation, especially if you have delayed processing or alexithymia. It helps you catch up with emotional processing backlogs that might have been missed in daily life, and it's quite a quick way to recalibrate. And it supports clarity and self-trust during major life decisions or life transitions. It also helps prevent burnout and feelings of being stuck that are caused by seemingly invisible blocks. It can also, when used with trauma-informed modalities, it can support trauma healing. I've outlined a beginner-friendly 7-step structure for doing a grief ritual, but I want to emphasize the point is to find what works for you, and it might look like this, it might look completely different to this, it might look different to anyone else's grief ritual, and that's totally fine. So feel free to explore starting with a structure or maybe even just following your own intuition. And this might serve as more as a backup if you feel stuck or if something feels missing. But anyhow, let's explore each of these steps as ideas that you may or may not use. I find it quite important to set the intention, and for example, you might set a specific time in the future to do grieving, and sometimes this can help your subconscious prep you for that eventual release, and your subconscious might work in the background to bring up the relevant memories and emotions. Next, you might decide how you want to shape the environment, and you might want to make things really comfortable to process. You might want to use different sensory elements to support yourself in feeling safe and grounded while also being in the right mood or state to process certain emotions. And then you might need to prepare this environment ahead of time, and this might involve buying snacks, curating a mood-based playlist, and exploring, maybe taking notes before you do your session. Now, once the session begins, you might feel a little bit intimidated, so you can think of small steps to maybe ease into that. That might be something as simple as letting out a sigh or doing a body scan, gentle movement, or finding a relaxing position to let your nervous system settle. And once you've set up the space, you've done the preparation and you're starting to ease into this, you can use reflection prompts or journaling, music, art, even watching a movie, or silence to explore what's present. And you can bring in any form of mindfulness that you feel can support this space. Memories and emotions and sensations might arise at their own pace, and if nothing much comes up, that is valid as well. It might not be the right time for you to grieve. And grieving isn't a once and done kind of thing. It comes in waves, it can come in cycles, and it's not something that you're trying to check off as a task. It's about building a relationship with your inner experience. And lastly, you might like to end a session on a small gesture, and it might be something like saying thank you to your inner self. It might be giving yourself a hug or a pat, and maybe sipping on some water to help your body transition back into the present. Self-connection is something that's deep and profound to experience, yet somewhat abstract to describe. And I would describe it as a process involving noticing your state, listening without judgment, and responding to care. The reason I describe this is because if you're relatively new to unmasking and self-connection, and some of you are overthinkers and this process might feel awkward, well, this is literally the process. If you have something that facilitates these three things, then you're not doing it wrong. It just might take some time before it feels like it's working or that it feels resonant. And that's partly because when we're used to masking our internal state, both from others and ourselves, our body actually begins to respond by raising different signals that can be a bit more confusing. That's where our nervous system can trigger things like non-structural pain, IBS, sensory issues, because we were ignoring the original emotional cues. And thankfully, by practicing self-connection and dutifully listening for these signals, our body can begin to trust us again and revert back to giving us clearer signals. So, what actually happens when we hold space for grief? Well, everyone's experience is going to be different, but here's a possible pattern that might come up. So, as you tune into your body and mindscape, feelings, sensations, images, thoughts, words, and symbols might begin to surface, and you discover more about yourself and what's going on in your inner world. This process gives you the chance to connect with your needs, your values, your desires, and to offer yourself compassion and validation for these things. And processing itself can be draining, but it often leads to a sense of release, insight, and emotional recalibration. It can reassure your body that it's safe to unmask with yourself, to be present, and to experience whatever it is that you experience. And if open experience feels a little bit too intimidating, you can use sensory modulation to bring out related feelings and circle around to what's going on for you underneath. Is it safe to grieve? And the short answer is yes. Grieving is a natural experience, it's a natural need, and there are many ways to do it, and you can absolutely use trauma-informed processing in your grief rituals. What if uncomfortable feelings arise? Well, if you're holding a safe space, by definition, it must allow for feelings of unsafety. And with various techniques, there are ways that you can approach this from the mindset that your body feels unsafe, but your mind might know that it is safe, and you can kind of use this to, bit by bit over time, reassure yourself that it's safe to connect with yourself. It's safe to feel what you feel. And sensory modulation can certainly help that process as well. What if your feelings become too intense? Well, you get to decide on the kind of space and the volume and intensity that you hold for your emotions. You don't have to process things at 100% intensity or volume. You can process things at 10% or 30%, depending on what your capacity is on that day. What if you feel overwhelmed by emotion? Not all overwhelm is the same, and some emotional intensity that might cause you to sob can actually be profoundly regulating, both emotionally and physiologically. However, you might want to avoid things that are triggering and that cause dysregulation, unless you're familiar with tools for navigating those safely already. Does grieving just reinforce sadness and negativity? I don't think so. Mindful grieving doesn't generate negative emotion. It helps you acknowledge and connect with and process what's already there for you, even if you've previously pushed it aside. Suppressing grief, on the other hand, can become a form of emotional masking that contributes to burnout over time. And I'd like to bring in this quote from Brené Brown. We cannot selectively numb emotion. If we numb the dark, we numb the light. If we take the edge off pain and discomfort, we are, by default, taking the edge off joy, love, belonging, and the other emotions that give meaning to our lives. And along that last note as well about negativity, some CBT-style approaches may imply that ignoring or reframing emotions is always helpful, but that might work for some people who often neurotypicals can process emotions more easily in the background, but autistic and other neurodivergent people often need conscious space and sensory regulation to move through their emotions. Intensity is often a neglected or misunderstood concept in regulation. Not all of us should aim for stillness and calm. For example, when you need to cry, you need to cry. And I don't have time to cover too much nuance here, but if people are telling you that you need to dial things down, that you innately experience as intense, they're probably wrong and they're probably being ableist. There are forms of mindfulness that cater to innate intensity, and there's some evidence that you're better off finding ways to channel these intensities rather than suppress them, because those intensities are tied to your neurophysiological needs. And in the case of chronic pain, for example, there's a Buddhist meditation concept that suffering comes from resisting pain as opposed to allowing yourself to feel it. And I certainly find that to be true. For example, I actually recover faster from pain and fatigue when I practice allowing myself to feel how intense it is. Next, let's talk about sensory processing and modulation. So sensory processing is how your brain takes in and responds to sensory information. Sensory modulation is using sensory input to help shift your body or mind into a more comfortable or desired state. And these are terms that an occupational therapist might be familiar with and be able to help you with. For example, they can help you design your day to be less demanding and overwhelming in a sensory sense, as well as use sensory approaches to regulate your state into what's desired for certain activities. And we can think of this in terms of the 8 senses. So smell, touch, hearing, taste, sight, balance and movement, proprioception, and internal body awareness. Now let's look at how you might construct your own ritual. So we can start off by making a list of ideas based on the senses about what kind of experiences or things that appeal about those senses. And we can combine those with desired moods and themes, including thoughts and prompts if you want to go down that avenue, or specific forms of mindfulness. If you're not sure, then pick a few options and explore, experiment and play, and just see what happens. Think of it like going to a candy store and buying a bunch of snacks and making the time to try them out and savor them. And also, literal snacks are, they're often involved in my case anyway. So here are some examples of how you might go about drafting ideas based on these senses. In terms of sight, you might prefer dimmed lighting, or you might want to be in nature or to be watching something visually stimulating like a movie. You might put together a sad playlist, or maybe sing along with it, or have noise playing in the background. You might want to wear comfortable clothing, massage yourself, stim or hug a toy. If smell appeals, you might try different scented candles. Taste-wise, maybe you want to eat salty or sweet snacks, depending on your mood. Do you want to feel full or hungry, or neutral when you're grieving? In terms of movement, maybe you might want to dance or move around, experiment with breath work, or just find relaxing poses to be in. You might like to rock or be on something like slightly less stable, like a beanbag. And you might like to think about the temperature, removing sensory triggers, and allowing yourself to lean into how much tension and fatigue is stored in your body. In terms of emotions, if you're feeling lonely, you might decide to pick romantic songs or things about heartbreak. And some ideas for mindfulness. There are literally thousands of different types and techniques of mindfulness, but for example, you can try self-therapy such as IFS or parts work, somatic memory processing, or in general, channeling of sensitivities. And another good idea is, do you want to be grieving, processing in the presence of a safe person or on your own? In terms of suggested prompts, so not everyone will want to use prompts, and these are just a possible starting point if you're not sure what you want to be thinking about or how to circle around to those feelings that that are underneath the surface. So, for example, what emotions have you been feeling lately, and what have you not had space to feel? What are some events that have happened but you haven't really registered them emotionally? What are your hopes and expectations that weren't met? What are you needing now that isn't met or feels unresolved, uncertain, or incomplete? What do you want more of or less of in life? What are some setbacks that you've experienced recently? Who are the people in your life that you care about? Are there relationships that you feel distant from or uncertain or want to deepen? What are some things that you feel the need to express but haven't been able to express, or maybe you feel afraid to express them? Where in your life might you be carrying the weight of masking? Have you been waiting for permission to do or feel something, and is there something that it's time to let go of? If any of these stands out, I invite you to make a mental note to explore these later. Processing is not a once and done kind of thing. It often comes in waves as emotions build up over time. And we can do kind of a periodic grief ritual, or we can also do more of an on-demand model, especially if you have developed this body awareness of knowing when your body is ready to grieve, or otherwise having a manual way to check in and recognize for those symptoms. For some people, it's quite hard for them to remember what's happened to them recently, and so it can be beneficial to be taking regular notes. And grieving never stops. It's a part of life, and you can make it a fulfilling and connective part of your self-care through grief rituals. And finally, where to go from here? So I invite you to think about, is there something that you'd like to commit to that has come up during this talk? Perhaps you'd like to explore one of the prompts, or book a time to craft your own ritual, or to maybe rewatch this talk another time. Tiny steps, they count and they add up. If something feels overwhelming, intimidating, or demanding, try picking a smaller step instead. Even taking one mindful breath is something, and once you lean into that something, you might feel like you can take on more. Experiment and play. See what happens. Self-connection isn't something you achieve. It's a space that you spend time exploring and being in. Lastly, I want to talk more about the power of holding space, and that's not just for grieving. It applies to a lot of things. And some of us, we tend to rely on doing and thinking, on willpower and discipline, and that can be really taxing and it might not be sustainable for us. But what are some areas of life where once you find the right spaces, the magic just automatically happens? Like when you meet the right people and they can already hold space for your intensity. Maybe you join a class and the teachers are really good at holding space for your curiosity and your and having a safe space to make mistakes. And basically, if you think about finding these right spaces, they can really carry you a long way with far less effort than relying on willpower and discipline. So I invite you to reflect on that idea. If you have any questions from this talk, or maybe you're a fellow mental health provider or exploring some of these topics for yourself, I love having conversations about these things, and so feel free to drop any questions or connect with me through Facebook or Instagram. Thank you for listening.